Hey, welcome back to the show. I'm sure all of you have heard or seen the headlines. Masked federal agents are storming your neighborhood. And this isn't just happening in your neighborhood, it's happening all across the country. And the implication of that is clear: secrecy, authoritarianism, abuse. But here's the problem: that narrative collapses as soon as you look at the facts, history, and the law. And today we're going to go ahead and discuss why federal agents wear masks, who are the people who all of a sudden decided that it was controversial, and why this outrage conveniently ignores officer safety. That and much more coming up right now. So before we begin, I think it's very important for us to define one key term that the media continues to abuse, and that's media framing. Media framing is when the media uses emotionally charged language and they use words like storming and secret police, intimidation, and they bring on these so-called experts that are professors, political scientists, global affairs analysts, and those supposed experts start using words like the Gestapo, the Nazis, white supremacists, and all types of derogatory terms. And the purpose of that is to invoke some type of emotional response from the audience. And that emotional response often leads people to continue watching the shows, which leads to higher ratings for the media. Now, what the media is not providing you is historical context. They don't talk to you about the threats that these agents incur on a daily basis. They don't talk about the doxing campaigns that happen almost every day as well, with some social media influencers doxing agents and their families. They don't talk to you about the family targeting that happens. They don't talk to you about the retaliation from these left-leaning college professors who find out that their students are related to agents that work for ICE. They don't talk to you about any of that. But look, we have to be transparent here. It's not only the media that's doing this. It's also politicians that are using this extremely dangerous rhetoric and extremely dangerous and violent language. Take a look.
I understand that Vice President Vance believes that shooting a young mother of 3 in the face 3 times is an acceptable America that he wants to live in, and I do not. And that is a fundamental difference between Vice President Vance and I. I do not believe that the American people should be assassinated in the street. Thank you.
That masked ICE agent showed reckless disregard for human life and unnecessarily killed an American citizen, leaving children without their mother.
And I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite.
It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome. And I say that only because people in positions of power have already passed judgment, from the president to the vice president to Kristi Noem, have stood and told you things that are verifiably false.
And just to demonstrate the hypocrisy of the media, this is the same media that demands officer transparency but refuses to acknowledge the very real threats that these officers and their families face every day. And in case you're wondering what that threat looks like to the agents and their families, I got you covered. DHS is reporting that there is a 3,200% increase to vehicular attacks on ICE agents, a 1,300% jump in assaults on immigration officers, and an 8,000% increase in death threats to the agents in this current year alone. And it's no secret what's leading to this increased level of violence. It's the heightened political rhetoric and the tensions following enforcement operations in these blue states. If you guys remember, some of these same operations were carried out in Louisiana. And you might be asking yourself, well, why wasn't there violence there? That's simple. Because local law enforcement cooperated with ICE and they turned over a lot of these prisoners that were in jail who were undocumented and criminals.
20 past the hour now, and President Trump's immigration crackdown is intensifying in New Orleans and the surrounding areas. So right now, more than 20 law enforcement agencies across Louisiana, they're teaming up with ICE under a new task force model. News Nation's Xavier Walton, he's been following this story closely. So Xavier, good morning. Which agencies have joined forces? What does this mean for the communities in Louisiana now?
Kelly, good morning. Yeah, so for these communities, it means certainly different things for different communities, but this massive immigration crackdown underway. New Orleans now has local police officially joining forces with ICE, and the operation coined Catahoula Crunch after the Louisiana state dog involves more than 20 law enforcement agencies and about 250 federal immigration officers targeting undocumented immigrants with criminal records.
What's happening in Minnesota is the complete opposite. They're releasing these criminals into the street instead of honoring these detainers. So once again, it's night and day between Louisiana and Minnesota. So since the media doesn't give you a historical context when it comes to the utilization of masks, especially with ICE, who's been using masks for the last couple of decades, let's talk about who uses masks as well besides ICE and nobody has any issues with. Masks are commonly used in SWAT, federal task forces. They're used for organized crime takedowns. They're used for terrorism investigations. And they're used for numerous other operations as well. And that includes the DEA and ATF. And look, the fact of the matter is that nobody complained when agents were using masks to take down cartels. It only matters now because it's affecting a political narrative. So from a historical context, we said that SWAT uses the masks, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal law enforcement. ICE has been using the mask for decades. ATF, DEA, FBI, and several other agencies use masks. People are clinging to this as if this was something new, and it's not. So what are the threats that they are facing today? Because people are going to say, well, they're not trying to take down cartels. These are civilians in the streets. Well, the violence in the streets right now is massive. And I'm going to show you a couple of videos here in a second of how bad it's actually gotten. But before we do that, let's talk about some of the modern threats that these agents are facing that they didn't face before. Let's talk about doxing. There's been a lot of doxing of agents in their home address, social media, and other sources of personal information that have led to personal death threats against these agents. Given the advent of social media, there are organized activist networks that are currently tracking officers and their families. Tell me how that's safe. And the threats are only amplified by politicians and the media rhetoric. When your name and face can be turned into a digital weapon in seconds, anonymity becomes the shield, not the threat. I want to debunk a myth that's out there right now that says that the only reason that these agents are wearing masks is because they're committing unlawful acts, because they're not abiding by the law, because they're breaking the law whenever they engage in these apprehensions. And I want to make a couple of points about that. And I want to make sure that I debunk this directly. Masks do not equate to anonymity in the system. The agents still have badge numbers, they have internal IDs, they have supervisors they need to report to, they have body cameras, there's after actions reports that need to be filled out and reviewed by supervisors. And remember, there's always federal court oversight. If these agents are breaking the law, let justice take hold and hold them accountable. The bottom line here when it comes to anonymity is that they're anonymous to the mob, not the law. And if they break the law, they're going to be held accountable. I think we all know what's happening here. It's selective outrage and political weaponization. Because masks are accepted when used against terrorists, when used overseas, when used against drug cartels, but they're condemned when immigration law is enforced and federal authority challenges local defiance. And when we talk about local defiance, we're talking about sanctuary cities that are protecting a lot of these dangerous criminals that are in the jails. This outrage isn't about masks. It's about enforcement. The left does not want immigration law enforced. And if they did, we would not have had millions of people crossing the border unvetted. And I want to be clear, I don't have an issue with people coming to this country. I immigrated into this country. I became a U.S. citizen. But that doesn't mean we can open the border and let millions of people come here unvetted, because it creates a problem not only for the system here in America, but for public safety and security. Look, so we have to be real about the downside of everything that's happening with these agents wearing masks, right? One of the things that's primarily concerning to me is the fact that a lot of these agents may hesitate during their operation. And I think what happens when you hesitate during an operation is that you not only put law enforcement lives at risk, but you put civilian lives at risk as well. When officers fear political retaliation more than they do criminals, public safety collapses, federal law enforcement collapses. And I think everybody on the left and on the right needs to turn down the temperature. And I think one of the key issues that people here in the United States that want to protest must understand is that when you do it, you have to do it peacefully, because you always run the risk of being designated as a domestic terrorist. And let me tell you, domestic terrorism is a hot button topic, because if you look at the definition of terrorism, a lot of the actions that people are engaging in when they come to protesting can be easily classified as domestic terrorism. But I'll let you be the judge of that. So let's take a look at what domestic terrorism actually is. So domestic terrorism is defined under 18 U.S. Code 2331. And I want to make sure everybody understands the legal definition here. An act qualifies as domestic terrorism if it meets all three of these following criteria. So the first one is that it involves acts that are dangerous to human life, that are a violation of criminal law in the United States or any state. That's the first criteria that needs to be met. The second criteria has several sub-criteria, and that includes intimidate or coerce a civilian population, which we see right now during these protests. It has to influence the policy of a foreign government by intimidation or coercion, and affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. And then the final criteria is that it has to occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. You know, if you look at what's happening out there in Minnesota right now, you can easily say that they are looking to influence the policy of a government by intimidation. These aren't just normal protests that are happening. These are violent intimidation tactics to try to get ICE to leave Minnesota. So let's take a look at some of the violence that's happening in Minnesota right now and why I believe that federal agents should be allowed to wear masks. Look, my take is that masks don't make federal agents dangerous. Lies do. And when the media strips the officers of context, history, and protection, they aren't holding power accountable. They're putting lives at risk. I think we as a society need to do better. I think there's just too much violence, too much hate in our streets right now. There's too much hate and divisiveness in America. I think all of us on the left and on the right need to look in the mirror and really decide what we want this country to look like. Because right now, the way that it's looking is not pretty. And it's definitely not a country that we want our kids to live in. We need to turn down the temperature on the political violence that's happening right now. And we also need to reflect as a society who we want to become in the future. Because if we don't come together and unite to ensure that we face all our troubles together, this country is going to be the next Roman Empire. So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, stay balanced.